So, what good'll my balls do us today?
Good question. CD Projekt Red both developed and published Cyberpunk 2077 and released it on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, PC, and even the short-lived Google Stadia. To say that they, along with the gaming community in general, had high hopes for the title would be a bit of an understatement. These were the people behind The Witcher 3, after all, the most beloved fantasy RPG released within the last decade, save for maybe Skyrim. Then it got delayed, not once, not twice, but 3 times, April to September, September to November, November to December. The customer base was annoyed, certainly, but they were still excited to stream and play when the game finally unlocked its seemingly pristine gates on December 10th of 2020. To say that the game had a rocky launch would be something of an understatement. Even now, almost a year and a half since its release, it has a 76% overall mostly positive score on Steam, due to the many glitches and bugs that you can find without any effort on your part when it came out and its resulting aftermath. Glitches and bugs that were so apparently problematic that the game was pulled from PSN a little over a week after it launched. To be fair, however, I'm also certain that the game had some review bombing due to people annoyed that it didn't quite meet their own expectations even if they themselves never actually played it. I cannot say from personal experience whether or not these bugs and glitches have been fully ironed out, at the absolute least on consoles, prior to this review. From what I understand, the problems plaguing the game there were mostly due to generational differences between their specific copies of Cyberpunk and the ones made available on PC or the most recent generation of consoles. Since this is a review of the game itself, I'm not going into the technical details about CDPR's apparent crunch time or the obviously overhyped status the game received long before it even dropped. But I felt some context was necessary, or needed. This game's launch and the details surrounding its release, as well as its creation in general, are generally a big deal and I think important to note. Another thing of note, I originally started to plan and script this review way back in May of last year. Some things have changed since then, and the script has also changed to reflect that, but I'll be keeping certain things in if I feel it worth mentioning. The game opens simply enough, with character creation and customization. You choose one of 3 backgrounds for V, your character. These backgrounds, or life paths as the game calls them, are Street Kid, Nomad, and Corpo. For the most part, this only affects the prologue and some dialogue choices that you can make in the game. The real treat is deciding on your character's looks. Here you have quite a few options. More than just body type, you can choose hair, eye color, tattoos, nail length, blemishes. Hell, you can even customize your dick if you want to, or outright remove your nipples. A sentence I never thought I'd actually ever say. It should be known, however, that whether or not characters refer to V as he or she is determined by your character's voice. After deciding on appearance, you decide on V's starting stats, which in turn makes up the umbrella under which the majority of all leveling takes place. These are body, reflexes, technical ability, intelligence, and cool. Body is the main determining factor for V's physical strength that even comes into play when hijacking a car. Reflexes is self-explanatory, your agility and general handling of guns. Technical ability applies toward the game's crafting and upgrading system. Intelligence is tied towards hacking and anything involving V's cyberdeck. Cool is the stealth statistic. Within each of these stats are specific skills, and the skill tree is hit or miss. Honestly, some of these perks are downright useless when compared to others, and there's still more that are almost offensively overpowered with the right build. Some are simple, giving a baseline percentage towards damage with a specific gun type, or a percentage chance for bonus components when disassembling, for example. Others are much more active, such as allowing you to throw knives or see the explosion radius of a thrown grenade, which you can also get as a cyberware mod if you're curious, so you can even opt to ignore some of these skills if you want to. No matter what skill tree you spec into, there's plenty of options. You can also level a skill's proficiency with use, and doing so grants both passive and active bonuses. From giving a flat percentage towards something, or just giving you a perk point, which you can then use on anything you'd like to. You're not limited to only using it on the skill tree that gave it to you in the first place, which is nice. After all of that, you enter the game properly, and at last enter into the open world that CDPR has devised. Night City. The city that will raise you from the lowest ranks of the social order to its reigning monarch, just as easily as it can make every person you've ever known simply forget about your existence. A city of gangs and violence, of bars and friends, of virtues but especially of vices. Here in Night City you can find quite a bit. You have Ripper docs, medical and technical professionals to implant and upgrade your cyberware. Those bits of skin and bone that aren't actually skin and bone anymore, closer to chrome now. Some of these implants are interesting. You've probably seen the Mantis blades from the trailers, but there's also leg implants that allow you to double jump and implants for your hand that allow you to use the smart lineup of weapons. Speaking of, Night City also has arms and armor on display at various vendors. You got 3 main kinds of guns, those being tech, power, and smart weapons. You've also got 2 different kinds of melee weapons, blunts and bladed. That's not to mention the various mods you can put on them, which each have their own effects and can fundamentally change the use of a weapon through simple or complex means, like eliminating horizontal recoil or simply negating a weapon's abilities to kill someone. Armor is unfortunately less varied in terms of their mechanics, though they do come with their own mods. I forgot to mention some mods can also be applied towards your implants as well. Thankfully, you don't have to buy all of your equipment. Enemies can drop gear and loot for you of varying qualities, which you can use, sell, or break down for parts. Given how some of the ads for the game showed it off, it seems strange that there isn't some kind of system in place based on the clothes you wear that could potentially change your interactions with NPCs, outside of some missions that require a specific outfit to progress them. Someone affiliated with a corporate agency could be more likely to talk with you if you got a matching suit, for example. Also, if all you do as it relates to your equipment is outfit yourself with the best stats possible, it'll often come at the cost of V looking like someone rummaged around in neon rave memorabilia that doesn't retain the same level of authenticity as it did 30 years ago. Or I guess 80 years ago in the case of the game. Beyond the shops, you also have the work, gigs, NCPD dispatches, bounties, mostly tied to those dispatches. The stuff that'll get you paid and raise your street cred more than anything else. And as a bonus, you unlock more stuff both to do and to buy as your street cred rises. Things like the Cyber Psycho sightings and the boxing tournament have something of a dual use beyond the usual go to a place and do a thing. They're also far enough apart that they can act as an introduction to various parts of Night City. When you follow along their quest lines, you tend to get calls from various fixers letting you know that they might have work for you when NCPD dispatches show up on your minimap as you get closer to them in your travels. Sometimes these side activities can be more interesting than their initial briefing would suggest, and rarely they don't require much work at all. In my Elden Ring review, I made the point that there's plenty to do in the game, but the catch there was that almost all of those things you could do are intrinsically tied toward the combat. In Cyberpunk, it's a different story. You can capture the divergent AIs of a well-known cab company, talk philosophy and shit-talk corporations with a terrorist that's sitting in your head, get a man with a literal burning dick to a doctor, rescue a different doctor from a group of people whose fascination with cyberware and tech borders on the religious, play a game of cops and robbers with kids via an AR headset, organize and partake in a concert, just to name a few. Obviously, not all of these things are going to be as interesting as other things, but it's worth noting that there's more to do than just point and shoot. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Night City has plenty to do for an up-and-coming merc like V, and one of the first hands it puts forward comes in the form of Jackie Wells, best friend and fellow merc, revealing that Dexter Deshawn may have a job for the 2 of you. Well, technically 3 of you. T-Bug is the netrunner for the crew, but your interactions with her are much more limited. Hell, you don't even see her face to face until the start of the heist itself. The heist entails grabbing the relic from under the nose of Yorinobu Arasaka, prodigal son and perceived heir to the Arasaka Corporation. You get no points for guessing that the heist doesn't quite go to plan, and now you got the relic stuck in your head. Surprise, surprise, the relic has the engram or digital psyche of one Johnny Silverhand, former terrorist and current Keanu Reeves, that's attempting to effectively rewrite your brain.
On behalf of the staff of the Independent California Motel, I wish you all sweet dreams.
Long story short, V goes, Johnny stays. Now you've got to find a way to remove the relic from your head and thus avoid its eventual erasing of everything that makes you, you. This also marks what's arguably the biggest issue that I have with the game. The best parts of the game come in the side missions, especially those ones that follow a quest line focusing on a specific character, in the same way that the main story seems to somewhat focus on the dynamic between V and Johnny, wherein V's life is actually at stake through no fault of Johnny's. I've got mixed feelings about the fact, however, that there's a forced waiting time between missions in the same quest line, including main quests, before they can be initiated. On the one hand, it reinforces the need to be doing something while waiting. You can and should occupy your time with other gigs or missions, or even just freely explore Night City in the meantime. You could also technically just skip time forward, that's an option. On the other hand, the entire main story revolves around the relic being a ticking time bomb in V's head that will slowly but surely kill them when enough time passes. Both the waiting and actions taken to kill that time make no sense from a pacing and story standpoint, because you would assume the priority would be dealing with the relic, Not to mention that some people, including myself, just aren't that patient and want to get the most important stuff done and dusted so it doesn't have to be worried about anymore. But since we're stuck waiting, every gig and NCPD dispatch becomes something of a blip on the radar, unimportant because there's no choice but to wait for the next big thing. We can't really focus on what's in front of us because we're waiting for the thing that's behind what's in front of us. While we're on the subject of arguably annoying and bad things, let's talk about bugs and weird design choices. A lot of the background information and lore about the world can be found in data shards. Itself, fine, but the menu. Every time I need to read a shard and miss its button prompts when I pick up the shard itself and are unaware that I need to read it at all until after the fact, I have to navigate and click through every category to minimize them, otherwise I'm stuck scrolling past more than 100 different entries. Every time. The Breach Protocol minigame is fairly simplistic. It could really slow down a gunfight though, which is something of a bummer. To make the most use out of your quick hacks, you need to breach your target first to lower the cost of the following hacks. Now, if you're planning to surprise your enemies and get a few shots off before properly engaging in combat, it's not really that much of an issue. In a similar vein, Brain Dance, or BD, seems like a mechanic that could conceptually make for an interesting puzzle game in and of itself. And no complaints, I just wish it was used more. On occasion, honestly more often than not, the loading screen will remain up, albeit briefly, when the game has assumably fully loaded. The first time I noticed was when I loaded a save where I had been sneaking and heard the alert sound effect even though the loading screen was still up, so I couldn't do anything about the alert. Another save, I'd heard the sound of combat, gunfire, impact of bullets, despite the fact that, if I remember correctly, the game doesn't even let you save in combat, which means it initiated combat when I couldn't do anything or even see what was happening. Why is skip ahead the same button as toggle crouch by default? I don't tend to mess with keyboard bindings unless it's really irritating, and by the time that I really grew annoyed by this, I'd already gotten used to using it. I just want to stand so that the video doesn't look weird, not skip through the audio so I don't actually know what's happening or what's being said, which just happens a few times as a result. Well, you might say, use control to crouch instead, but I'm a sneaky boy, and holding control the entire time I'm sneaking around would be more than just irritating. You also can't skip dialogue while in a car, which makes sense if the car's moving, not so much when it isn't. I think this is because skip ahead isn't just skipping the dialogue, the audio, it also skips the visual aspect as well, a character's movements. In a moving car, that would probably not be good unless they're the ones driving and you aren't. I'm also kind of disappointed in enemy variety. I mean, you've got this world that functions with physical alterations to your body, with both hidden and rampant AIs both metaphorically and literally running around, and machines and robots on occasion just straight up walking in the day-to-day, but most enemies are some variation on dude with gun, and even those melee-oriented enemies do similar if not outright the same things. It's a shame. I would have loved to see what strange things Maelstrom could think up, or see an unleashed AI try to meld with various real-world tech to become this malformed monstrosity the Militech would rather soon forget, but things like that are few and fairly far between. Even robotic enemies tend to fall into that same trapping. Although, drone with gun, not dude. I should specify that I mean this more mechanically than visually, because visually they look good. Seeing which bits and pieces of Maelstrom Gangoon is replaced with chrome is cool, and Arasaka's black-red color motif is nice. And I'm not saying that because I'm biased, since those are my two favorite colors. Fuck off. I've come across a few bugs in my 50-ish hour runtime. The most obvious one that surprisingly only happened once, maybe twice. I tried to call my car and it just drove past me. Calling it a second time caused it to respawn and not drive past me this time. Another bug didn't let me use my scanner at a time when I needed it to progress. One instance, I couldn't change the camera view while I was in my car. Last one's less of an issue, but more annoying because I'm what they call a shit driver, and I enjoy being able to see the third-person view and all it entails. I've also noticed that occasionally the in-game radio just doesn't play when I'm in the car. I don't really know why. There's one point I just couldn't sprint. The entire UI simply disappeared, and at another separate point, no matter which direction I pressed, V would just exit the car. At first, I assumed that last one was tied to the nearby Cyberpunk sighting mission, but this happened after I cleared it. All of these bugs, minus the lack of a radio and the Cyberpunk ones, were fixed with a simple save and load, thankfully. Wasn't anything I could reasonably call a persistent issue aside from the radio problem. That happened multiple times. I don't know the cause. It would eventually fix itself whenever it happened, if I waited long enough, which, good, but still weird it happened in the first place. Oh, also the tutorial for buying a car popped up while I was talking to Takamura. Not really sure on the why there either, because I don't think I was talking about a car. There was one major annoying thing I'm going to assume is a bug, though I won't show it on screen due to spoilers. I'm sneaking around on a ship, and there's this laptop that I can access that has 2 audio recordings that I can listen to, which is even listed as an optional objective for the mission I'm currently in. But as soon as I go into that specific area on the ship, combat is automatically initiated, despite me sneaking. I don't know if this is simply a quirk of my ally NPC who's accompanying me on the mission, or a quirk of a different kind, but immediately after combat ends, which takes almost no time at all because there aren't that many enemies and they aren't exactly difficult to deal with to begin with, I'm no longer able to listen to those audio recordings and automatically fail that optional objective. Now, I'm fine with the objective, technically being a failure, but it fully stops me from listening to those recordings at all, to the point where it even cuts off the recording when I'm actively listening to it when combat ends. The result ends up in me just trying and rushing through the audio, which is even stranger because of the clash of dialogue from those recordings, your allies' dialogue about the recordings, the dialogue from combat, the scripted dialogue from that combat, the audio from combat in general, and the fact that at any point the recordings will simply cut off, even the subtitles, because the combat ended. You have no idea how much I tried to save and reload just to hear those recordings. I don't think I ever got a full picture, even with hearing them both beginning to end because of all the shit surrounding that. I digress. Immediately I noticed the visuals. They're great, and the first example I can immediately think of is the Dashi Parade, which I unfortunately forgot to get footage for, so fuck me, I guess. But even looking around can showcase how good Night City can look, and this is even reflected in the details on characters in the game down to their very skin. Another showcase of surprising detail, the background of the main menu, as well as the following loading screen, changes based on what your most recent story mission was. This commitment to detail is also seen in the game's various ads, which are pretty cool. Unfortunately, I can't really show a lot of them. I mean, in Night City there's a TV show lovingly called Watson Horrors, so I'm sure you can understand why I'm not doing a thorough run-through of every ad. Still cool though. Coupled with the visuals is naturally the audio. I really like the music, and it's noticeably great when it comes to ramping up tension. The song You Shall Never Have to Forgive Me Again, as well as what plays when you grab the flathead from Maelstrom before the heist, are especially keen examples of this.
So what you think?
Yep, we'll take it.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see your cred.
Brick got it. It's all paid up.
Got it. I don't see any fucking brick around here, do you?
I appreciate that CDPR threw in things like the soundtrack at no extra cost so I can listen to the music as much as I like in my own time, though, to be fair, I probably would have bought the soundtrack anyway. The way the game looks and sounds could be pointless if the game actually felt bad to play, but it feels good. The story is relatively linear with some diverging choices able to be made at certain points. The open world that's Night City also facilitates some interesting concepts and ideas and executes most of them fairly well. A lot of the game's more interesting interactions are off the critical path to the point where all but one of those things that I mentioned earlier that you can do are from side missions. Characters are also, for the most part, intriguing. V themselves seems pretty tame comparatively though. They do have a somewhat clearly defined goal, the motivation and exact details of which are dependent on you as the player more than anything else. Are you doing it for the cash or for the challenge? It's your call. Johnny also has his own motivation and goals, which he's not exactly quiet about if I'm being honest. I say that like it's a bad thing, but nah, it's cool. And this is showcased through some scenes involving him where you can make a choice and he just doesn't do that. Normally speaking, I wouldn't like that kind of illusion of choice, but it makes sense within the context of the story. Either way, the side characters are what really do it for me. Panam.
Need a hand?
Of course, but in your shoes, I would look for another way in first. My, that was quick.
Judy.
Heard shots. You still alive? I'm here. Got no time to creep around.
River.
Apologize to Joss for me. We kinda dined and dashed yesterday.
And left puke all over the bathroom?
Oh, shit.
They're great. My first playthrough took around 50 hours, but it should be noted that a lot of that time was spent doing various side missions, which I almost forgot to mention can potentially have an effect on the ending. The main story itself could probably take a good deal less time than that, and thankfully you can effectively get every ending off of the same save. The game allows you to load an autosave from just before that last mission, initiated after the credits, with some bonuses from the ending. That's a plus. Personally, I think that Cyberpunk 2077's overhyped status and horribly botched state at release really tarnished what it could have been, and CDPR is still recovering. They've been fighting tooth and nail to get this game to a state considered acceptable by those who lambasted it in the ground. The only reason I can call myself an exception to that, despite the fact that I'm one of the people who did pre-order it months before it was actually released, I think is twofold. Firstly, most simply, up until this review, I didn't really put that many hours into it. I've always had an issue when it comes to playing games to completion, always keeping an eye out for the next big thing or just being easily distracted by the many options I have when it comes to gaming alone, that's not to mention other forms of media. I also never focused solely on this game as the primary this is what I'm looking forward to game. I mean yeah, like everyone else, I got goosebumps when I heard Keanu Reeves tell me,
Wake the f up, samurai. We have a city to burn.
And I never played it to a degree where I could reasonably say how I felt about it at the time. I can't speak for how it used to be, I can only speak for how I feel about it now. And I like it. Story on.